no less than those in the military. COVID's evolution from pandemic to endemic has not relieved the pressures on the NHS and its workers, who are still widely regarded as heroes in their care for patients. But for many of them, and other individuals and families on low incomes, the availability of truly affordable housing is as scarce as it was for those returning from the front in 1918. I'm privileged to have the opportunity to introduce this debate today on affordable housing, even if it's depressing to confront the sheer scale of the problem. I'm conscious of the profound knowledge and experience that the other speakers today have in this field, and I'm very grateful that they will be bringing their expertise to bear on this problem. I'm truly delighted that the Noble Baroness Lady Smith of Llanfaes has chosen today's debate in which to make her maiden speech, which I very much look forward to hearing. There is, of course, my lords, rarely a day when the problems of the housing market are not central to public debate and news coverage. This week, the Nationwide Foundation and the Church of England led a powerful group of organisations and individuals in the publication of Homes for All, with a wide-ranging analysis and suggested priorities, to which a cross-party group of your lordships has contributed. Much of this debate is around the overall housing market, rather than the affordable and social sectors on which we are focused today. Of course, this overall market is relevant to the affordable and social sectors, but is the context for and driver of the underlying problem. If housing costs generally were not so high in the UK, then market rents and market purchase prices would be affordable further down the scale of household incomes. One vivid illustration of the underlying problem of this has been given by Paul Cheshire, the Emeritus Professor of Economic Geography at the LSE. In 1955, a dozen eggs cost a little under 6 shillings. How nostalgic it is to express it in the currency of my childhood, or 28 pence in this newfangled decimal currency. If the price of eggs had increased in the subsequent 50 years or so at the same level as the price of housing land, the price today of a dozen eggs would have risen to £91. The sclerotic and political planning system lies at the heart of the shortage of housing land and its consequent eye-watering price, which is why I welcome the Labour Party's clearly and rigorously defined intention to reform the planning system. Even if the electorate chooses later this year to give the Labour Party a mandate to push through its planning reforms, the need for more affordable and social homes will remain. Even if over time a Labour government can address low pay and the position of those through no fault of their own on benefits, there will still be a need for more affordable housing. I promised myself not to overload my remarks today with figures, but there are a few which are inescapable in illustrating the scale of the problem. There are 1.2 million individuals or families on local authority waiting lists for social housing. Over 100,000 are in temporary accommodation. Over the 10 years to 2021, the completion of affordable and social homes averaged 50,000 a year. During this period, critically, homes built for social rent, 65% or less of market rents, fell from around half of that to a fifth. Affordable rent, 80% of market rents, which represents a still intolerable burden on the lowest income households, has become the largest part of this broad sector. And the remaining category of shared ownership or low-cost ownership is likely to be way out of reach for those lowest income households. The Social Housing Commission calculated in 2019 that over 3 million social homes needed to be built over 20 years to meet needs, over 150,000 a year. The Bramley paper for the National Housing Federation in Crisis made its own analysis and reached a very similar figure of 145,000 per year. Mission impossible. The challenge, should we accept it, is to triple the level of affordable and social housing built annually compared to that achieved in the past decade, and to ensure that of the almost universally accepted total house building target of 300,000 homes per year, 50% should comprise affordable and social homes, compared to the 25% in recent years. Should we accept this challenge, my lords? Yes, of course. Let us unlock our inner Ethan Hawkes and Ilse Fausts and accept the challenge. Because if we do not, we condemn hundreds of thousands of individuals and families to a life of financial hardship, anxiety and distress. The provision of affordable housing, most importantly, contributes to the well-being, happiness and mental health of individuals and families who are otherwise living insecurely in overcrowded and substandard conditions, while paying a disproportionate share of their income for that privilege. But in addition, there is clear evidence of a wider economic benefit from improved productivity, better workforce participation, greater rates of innovation, and critically, improved provision of public services in which so many lower earners work. Back to where we came in, my lords. These economic benefits, GDP and tax revenue enhancement, cost savings on temporary accommodation, from reduced reliance on short-term agency workers, for instance. In the medium to long term, these at least mitigate the cost of increased investment in affordable and social housing. But in the shorter term, there is inevitably an upfront financial cost, as well as the challenge of executing such an expanded building programme cost effectively and as fast as possible. I was thinking, there's no silver bullet. Then that reminded me of a consulting firm, a Micro McKinsey, which I've worked with in the past, rather wonderfully named by its founder, the Silver Bullet Machine Manufacturing Company, the emphasis on the word machine. The point the founder was making in a dryly humorous way is that looking for a random single large silver bullet to solve a problem is vanishingly unlikely to be successful, whereas establishing a system or process that identifies and utilises a number of smaller silver bullets is far more likely to be productive. Each of central government, local government, housing associations and the private sector needs to play their part and, if necessary, be empowered to do so. It should be a true mixed economy. Each party may act alone in some cases or in partnership in others. Each has challenges. Local authorities rightfully aspire to the central role that they have had historically, but the restrictions on their ability to reinvest the proceeds from right to buy over the years has significantly reduced their financial firepower. The increase from 40 to 50% retention recently announced by the government is welcome, but why not 100%? The reduction in building activity over the past 45 years, exacerbated by the vicious cuts in local government funding by Conservative or Conservative-led governments since 2010, has left many local authority housing departments atrophied. It will take time for these to be rebuilt, even under a more enlightened central government regime, particularly as planning departments also need strengthening in many cases. Housing associations are limited in their capacity to build new homes by their inability to raise equity funding, limits on their gearing levels, and the capital investment required to maintain their existing stock. They can still continue to contribute directly and significantly to the 150,000 new affordable homes a year needed, but also vitally as partners, particularly to private funders and providers, as managers of homes owned and or developed by others. The private sector encompasses landowners, commercial developers, the construction industry, and the specialist, mostly private affordable housing funds and investors. I will touch on landowners in a moment, but will otherwise speak briefly about the specialist funds. If there is not to be a Trussian renouncement of all discipline in public borrowing, which your lordships will know would not happen under my right honourable friend, the Shadow Chancellor, private equity capital is needed to play its part in achieving the challenging targets for new homes, not just the capital, but the development skills as well. PFI and private equity's role in the utility industries, notably the water industry, understandably cause concerns at the prospect of private capital playing a larger part in the affordable housing sector. We should learn from this history. In the water industry, there has been a toxic combination of a disgracefully weak regulator and unfettered, aggressive maximisation of financial returns by some private equity houses. On the one hand, government and parliament must ensure the regulator for social housing is strong and robust. On the other, the specialist funds need to behave in a responsible way. Not a forlorn hope, I believe, in the light of these funds' culture and central position in the ESG and sustainable investing movement, which should also ensure that net zero is embedded in all they do. Finally, central government, which must drive and coordinate all of this and provide the funding for the grants to local authorities, housing authorities and private funders alike, needed to deliver the homes at the affordable and social rents. It has to be recognised that much of these subsidies will be for the southern half of England, given that this is where the gap between market and affordable rents is greatest, and this needs to be reconciled with levelling up ambitions. Should landowners provide more of that subsidy through the imposition of more ambitious Section 106 conditions without choking off the supply of land? That would require cross-party agreement about a long-term policy to remove the incentive for landowners to hang on and hope a future government will introduce a more advantageous regime. A friend with long experience in both the housing association and the private sector said to me this week, "Remember the two Harolds." No, not the two Ronnies, but the fact that only under Harold Macmillan and Harold Wilson in recent history have there been material state-driven expansions of affordable housing. My right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, may not be called Harold, though he is a strong admirer of the Labour Harold's career. I'm confident, though, that he and my right honourable friend Angela Rayner would become honorary Harolds if a Labour government is elected. I'm sorry that we will not have the opportunity to hear today from any latter-day Macmillans from the backbenches opposite, but I hope the noble Baroness, the Minister's reply, will make up for that.
The question is that this motion be agreed to.
My Lords, I thank the noble Viscount Lord Chandos for initiating this debate. I congratulate him on a really excellent opening speech, and I look forward to the maiden speech of the noble lady, Baroness Smith of Clanfairs. the background to our debate is a rather frightening recent deterioration in the availability of affordable housing. I have just seen the figures out earlier this month showing a rise of 21,000 children now living in temporary accommodation, up from 121,000 to 142,000 over the last 5 quarters. Temporary accommodation is the best barometer of acute shortages. It is also a hugely expensive alternative to having a sufficient supply of genuinely affordable housing, to use Lord Chandos's phrase, which is seriously compounding local authorities' budgetary problems. The simple reason, my lords, why tens of thousands of children are being expensively and inappropriately housed in temporary accommodation is that there is just not enough housing to go round. The UK has not been building new homes and at an equivalent rate to other European nations. If we had achieved the average new build output for all members of the European Union, the Centre for Cities estimates we would have an additional 4.3 million homes nationwide. And when there is an overall shortage, it is, of course, those on the lowest incomes who are the hardest hit. The Independent Affordable Housing Commission, which reported in 2020, spelt out the twin phenomena of A, the decline of social housing, i.e. provision by councils and housing associations, from 34% down to 17% of the nation's stock, and B, the growth of private renting from 9% up to 20%. Simultaneously, there has been the loss of over 1.5 million social rented homes from sales under the right to buy, more than a third of these now in the hands of private landlords at much higher rents. My lords, the private rented sector is unsuitable or unaffordable for many. So doubling this sector's size and halving that of social housing has left many households with no options. To rebalance the market as between the private rented sector and the social rented sector, the commonly acknowledged solution is to increase the supply of social rented housing, that is, homes that are let at often half the market rents, according to a formula used for most existing social housing. Several studies have concluded that a figure of around 90,000 such homes should be built every year. Secretary of State Michael Gove told the Lords Select Committee on the Built Environment on the 6th of February this year, we need to aim to have a net addition of 30,000 for social rent every year. This target from the Secretary of State may sound unambitious, but it would mean far greater numbers of social rented homes than have been added in recent years. However, without major changes, there is no possibility of achieving either the overall government target of 300,000 homes a year or within that of 30,000 social rented homes. Indeed, rather than a growth in supply, output in both the private and social sectors has been falling significantly. Higher interest rates and inflation of building costs means social housing grants fund fewer new social rented homes. At the same time, it's become necessary to channel more social housing investment into the existing stock rather than funding new supply. This follows a number of high-profile cold and mould cases, most notably causing the death of little Awab Ishak. With the Social Housing Regulation Act 2023 and more powers for the Housing Ombudsman, the housing associations and the stock-holding councils are rightly spending more on retrofitting their existing stock. The result of these trends is a big reduction in the pipeline of new affordable homes. One major housing association, for example, has self-imposed a 2-year moratorium on any new development. Overall starts on site by social landlords are expected to fall this year by more than 30%. Meanwhile, because the private sector house builders, faced with lower profits, are postponing their developments, there are also fewer new social rent homes being achieved through planning gain contributions from the developers. So, my lords, what can be done? And I didn't acknowledge earlier that I should declare my own housing and property interests as on the register. A starting point must surely be to have a national housing strategy. This would comprise an agreed vision for achieving the quantity and quality of new and existing homes that we all seek, with a roadmap to take us to this destination. Following the Church of England's report Coming Home, a number of your lordships have been supporting the Church's subsequent efforts to help create such a strategy. We suggest the establishment of a statutory National Housing Committee modelled on the Climate Change Committee. This would provide a long-term mechanism that holds government to account, irrespective of changes of housing ministers — we've had 16 in the last 14 years — and secretaries of state, monitoring progress toward the agreed goals. It would be wonderful if this concept found its way into party political manifestos. In the short term, there is no escaping the need for government funding, principally via Homes England and the GLA. Most immediately, more investment is needed for property acquisition and modernisation to switch private rented sector properties into social housing and reverse the shocking rise in temporary accommodation spending. But more fundamental change is needed. The Labour Party has made bold statements for growth through developing grey belt land and building a new generation of new towns. For initiatives such as these, any government will need to find ways of making available funding that goes much further and securing a better planning system, a better resourced planning system. To that end, I would advocate the adoption of the model spelt out by Sir Oliver Letwin in his excellent report, which disgracefully has been sitting on the shelf since 2018. The Letwin approach involves ending the dependence on the oligopoly of volume house builders whose interests seldom coincide with the public good, and shifting the initiative for all major housing projects to locally established development corporations. These corporations, which are less susceptible to local opposition, would have CPO powers to acquire land at a price that reflects the content of a master plan, which embraces the necessary infrastructure, green space and facilities. The site would then be parcelled out to the appropriate providers, including social landlords, SME builders, community land trusts, providers of retirement housing, etc. By capturing the uplift in land value for the public good, this model makes possible affordable quality homes at scale. In conclusion, my lords, I suggest therefore that the way forward begins with the establishing of a statutory National Housing Committee, just like the Climate Change Committee, which sets out the path to agreed goals and provides the continuity and persistence to see the job done. And to get there, as well as the necessity of more public investment, which is handsomely repaid in lower health, care and welfare spending and improved productivity, there are also bigger and bolder changes of approach to planning and land acquisition that could make a huge difference. It is certainly worth trying against the backdrop of human misery which the severe under-provision of genuinely affordable housing has created.
My Lords, I congratulate my noble friend Viscount Chandos for initiating this debate, and I am particularly pleased at the terminology they used in this debate, the title of this debate. The term genuinely affordable housing is what we're on about. In the government's jargon, affordable has become meaningless. In many parts of the country and for hundreds of thousands of families, 80% of private rent levels are not affordable. And to use that as a term of art in legislation and regulation on affordable rent and affordable housing statistics is actually misleading the depth of the problem that we have to address. I likewise look forward to the maiden speech of Baroness Smith of Conflation, and I hope she can bring a different perspective to this. I also am glad to follow the noble Lord Best in one sense, except that he's pinched most of what I was going to say. That isn't going to shut me up, but nevertheless I agree with pretty much all that he said. My lords, in the days of Lloyd George, to which my noble friend referred, after the First World War, around about 75% of people lived in private rented accommodation, most of it pretty squalid, a very significant part of it very insecure, with the powers of landlords being strong. We transformed that over most of the last century, until relatively recently, where we started to go backwards. When, by the 1980s, we were in a position where, from the 1920s onwards, social housing had provided decent housing at affordable prices for a large section of the population, rising to about 30%. Since the 1980s, however, with a right to buy without the proceeds being 100% fed back to a new building, and with demolitions and with stock transfers, that figure for social housing has fallen, and I know it is now down to, I think, about 17%. And of course the prices of new homes, for those in the property market, has risen from 3.5 times average earnings up to something over 8%, 8 times. So both mortgage holders and aspirant mortgage holders and private renters are now struggling. For many people, mortgages are now unattainable, and many who had secured mortgages are now threatened by the phenomenon of rising interest rates. So there is, in every part of the housing market, insecurity, unaffordability, and distress. There is also a decline in physical conditions, which I'll come on to. But at the same time, as Lord Best has said, household formation has continued apace, and the figures that everybody's accepted in recent years, we need to build, or need to provide, one way or another, 300,000 new homes a year. That figure has never been anything like attained. And in any case, is a bit of an exaggeration. 200,000 that we've hit from time to time, and slightly over 200,000, is a gross figure, not a net figure of demolitions. My lords, it's also been regrettably the case that for most of the last century, social housing has provided a positive, safe and affordable alternative. That has declined over recent years. And the number of scandals in both local authority and housing association accommodation, with mould and damp and unhealthy conditions and repairs not being addressed, has made social housing less attractive. My lords, in the days when both numbers of social housing and the standards in local authority social housing in particular were improving, and it also set the benchmark for the good housing associations, the relationship between local authorities and social landlords generally and the construction industry were very different from what they are now, as the noble Lord Best has implied. On the one hand, local authorities had substantial in-house staff and architects, and had their own direct maintenance staff in most cases, and they were likely to be the main procurer of house construction work in their areas. On the other hand, in those days, the days of Harold Macmillan and Harold Wilson, the construction sector was highly competitive locally, with SMEs, a dozen or so SMEs, mainly large family businesses, were competing for their local authorities' work. Nowadays, as Lord Best has said, most architects' departments and most direct works have been dispensed with, and even a competent clerk of works does not exist But the house building sector is dominated by large house builders and large developers, which means that the balance of power within the house building market has changed dramatically, and we need to do something to change that. There are people, my lords, who blame the planning system for the lack of providing new houses, and the planning system is not perfect, but we don't want to uproot it entirely, because it does actually protect the environment in which people live and the provision of decent housing. And it's not the planning system that is a major problem, but frankly, the fact that when planning permission has been granted, there's probably up to 1 million homes which have not yet been started. And it is that, rather than blockages in the planning system, which are meaning that the supply of new homes has been so diminished. And the reduction of environmental standards or loosening planning restrictions will not speed up that process unless we address it directly by ensuring that starts are made in those areas. We also have to recognise that the usual figure for new homes required, new homes completed, is the gross figure, not the net figure. In other words, it is not, doesn't take account of demolitions, particularly demolitions of social housing. I've argued before in this chamber that the predilection of many developers, and in some cases planning committees, for both public and private estates to go for demolition and rebuild rather than the option of retrofit, which is both environmentally more sensible and is likely to be much less socially disruptive, is also a problem for us. We need to make sure that in all major planning permissions, the alternative of retrofit is always considered. My lords, we are going to need more social housing, and most of that is going to come from local authorities. And as I've said, local authorities, both in the financial terms and in terms of their expert staffing, have been sadly diminished from the great days. I did at one point think, or was nearly persuaded, that the idea of having hived off arm's length companies owned by local authorities would help do that. But we've seen local authorities of all political persuasions have their fingers very severely burnt by going down that road. And what we need is something closer to what Lord Best was arguing for, of regionally based local authority area corporations who become the major procurer within the housing market and therefore can face down the house builders in their intention to, for example, in any major mixed development, keep the level of social housing at a low level, and then halfway through the project say they can no longer afford that and get it reduced yet further. That phenomenon needs to be removed from the housing market. My lords, I agree with Lord Best that we need a new housing strategy. Whether it's a housing committee or a housing corporation or a housing cabinet committee, I don't mind, as long as we have an overall approach to it which can face up to all of these problems. My lords, for many families, for many key workers, as my noble Lord Viscount Chandos has said, for many key workers, it is impossible to find a place to live they can both afford and be safe and secure in. We need to make a change. I hope the Labour government will make a change. But, my lords, whoever is running this country in the next few years, the housing problem for the least secure people in this country needs to be addressed, and needs to be addressed urgently.
My lords, when my colleague, my noble friend, Lord Wigley, made his maiden speech in your lordship's house, he spoke of his election alongside the noble Lord, Lord Ellis Thomas, to the other place in 1974. He said, "It was once suggested that the two of us entered the place as revolutionaries and departed as mere reformers, but if the objectives which we then had, to which I still aspire, of a new relationship between the nations of these islands can be achieved by reforming the structures of government, that is all to the good." And if the process of devolution allows Wales to take appropriate decisions on an all-Wales level and to have its voice heard when other decisions are taken on a wider basis, that is also to the good. As I begin my time in your Lordship's house, I associate myself with those words. And I pay tribute to my noble friend, Lord Wigley, not only for his many years of dedicated service in your Lordship's house, but also for his decades of public and political service to my party and to Wales.
Hear, hear.
I can only hope to follow in his footsteps, and in times perhaps to earn the same level of esteem in which he is held. It will not have escaped your Lordship's attention, though, however, and I know that my noble friend won't mind my saying this, that I do look rather differently to Lord Wigley. Since my nomination was announced, much comment has been made about my age, the colour of my hair, and my choice of footwear. And I assure your Lordships that I'll be proud to wear my Doc Martens in this place. My Lords, I am young, I'm a woman, and I'm from Wales. Your Lordships know well that is not the norm for this place. And I'm now one of only 36 members of your Lordship's house who is below the age of 50, one of only 6 below the age of 40, and the only one below the age of 30. And I'm conscious of the particular responsibility which now falls to me, not only as the youngest current member of your Lordship's house, but also the youngest life peer to ever have been created. My responsibility, as I see it, is to not just be my own voice or that of my party or my country, but to be a voice of my generation. And my own experience is that of growing up on a council estate in Llanfaes in Ynys Môn as a young carer to my dear late father, battling on a daily basis the kind of prejudices and barriers that too many of our fellow citizens still face, trying to find hope and build a future for myself in a world where the odds seem to be stacked against people like me. Burning with anger at the deprivation to which my community had been subjected, and these experiences are not unique to me. My generation has a particular experience, a particular perspective, which deserves and needs to be reflected in this place. We grew up through the global recession at the end of the first decade of this century. We grew up in the shadow of terrorism at home and overseas. We grew up with the internet and social media. We grew up in the age of devolution. We grew up with the ever-growing threat and reality of climate change and mankind's destruction of the natural world. We grew up at a time of increasing and often aggressive polarisation in our politics, in the age of Trump and Brexit, and we became adults in the age of COVID. During our short lifetimes, we have seen inequality grow and poverty deepen, and we see, despite our protests, the world leaders facing still to respond adequately to the climate and nature crises. We see wealth inequality all around us. We see high debts and housing costs, low wages and unstable work. And that is why I'm particularly pleased to be making my maiden speech during this debate. And I thank the noble Lord, Lord Chandos, for bringing this motion today. In August last year, the Wales Expert Group on the Cost of Living Crisis noted that rising rent and mortgage payments are affecting households' disposable income, and that low-income households are particularly affected. They also said that the full impact of poor housing security is yet to be felt, and that by May 2023, the number of people placed in temporary accommodation, including children, had increased by a third on the previous year. The housing and homelessness charity Shelter Cymru, meanwhile, says that young people are not on an even footing with their older peers. They tend to have lower incomes and are more likely to be earning minimum wage and or work in zero-hour contracts. They're penalised by the UK welfare system, which limits their entitlement to housing benefit, and are routinely discriminated against and exploited by landlords and letting agents when attempting to rent in the private sector. Housing is, of course, a devolved subject area, but social security is not, and it is the interplay of these two dimensions that is of critical importance. Data shows that by the spring of last year, around 67,000 people in Wales were on social housing waiting lists, and almost 7,000 were in emergency accommodation. And then by October of last year, almost 90,000 were on waiting lists, and over 11,000 were in temporary accommodation, of which almost 3,500 were children. And of course, many of us in Wales know all too well the difficulty that so many people, especially young people, face in buying a home in their own community, particularly in the rural and coastal parts of Wales, where the Welsh language is the strongest. And for these reasons, it is imperative that the voices of young people are included in your Lordship's deliberations. Since the announcement of my nomination to this place, I have been quite open in my view that, although I believe Welsh voices are necessary here now, while this place has a say in the laws that govern Wales, I do not believe that an unelected upper chamber has a place in a modern democratic society. While I may be in the minority in your Lordship's House in holding that view, I would not be doing my job if I did not continue to express it. Nevertheless, it is my intention to be constructive in my contributions here, and I look forward to offering my perspective and sharing my voice in your Lordship's deliberations, and I look for your support as I do that. In closing, I should like to thank my supporters, my noble friend Lord Wigley and the noble Baroness Lady Bennet, and all those noble lords and baronesses who have taken the time to welcome me and offer me their advice since my arrival. I have been touched and humbled by the welcome that I have received. And I also offer my thanks to Black Rod, the clerks, the doorkeepers and security services and the police and the many and various members of staff, both party and parliamentary, who have all been unfailingly warm and courteous in the welcome that they've given me. And I thank my friends in the other place and look forward to working alongside them in Wales's interests. And finally, I thank my family and friends for the love and support that they have given me. I am the person I am because of them, and I can only hope to do them proud. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
My Lords, it's an honour and a privilege to follow the maiden speech of the noble Baroness Lady Smith of Llanfass, who I will call my noble friend, because constructive cooperative politics has to be a way forward in this changing, challenging world. I'm delighted to congratulate the noble lady on a spectacular maiden speech. The voice of Wales has very definitely been heard, as it so often has been heard from the noble Lord Wigley. And the arrival of Doc Martens has been duly noted. I would believe, my lords, that we need to hear many more younger voices in your Lordship's House, and I hope that the noble lady will not be the youngest member for too long. The noble lady and her peers are the experts of the experience of being in the world today, the experience of being a young person in a world today. And it is crucially important, and I have no doubt at all that the noble lady will be bringing so much of that voice to us. Now, as we've just heard, and as the noble lady told the Times, she plans to stand up for the people of Wales, and of course as the former Chief of Staff for Plaid Cymru in the Senate, and also working in the European Parliament, the noble lady brings great experience and knowledge from that. We're also talking, of course, about the balance of representation. Gender, we are still a very, very long way from the 50-50 Parliament that an excellent campaign group is calling for, but also in terms of age. But we need these experiences. We desperately need these experiences. Now, the newspapers have also got very excited about the noble lady's desire, which I share, to replace your lordships with an elected body. She, with greater cause than I, has great reason to ensure that she does not have a life sentence in your Lordship's House. Now, I wish to thank the noble Viscount Chandos for giving us the opportunity to debate this absolutely crucial issue, and particularly, as the Noble Lord Whitty commented, on the way the debate is titled in talking about genuinely affordable housing. And that qualifier is needed because, of course, we have now, in terms of housing, something of a word soup of terms relating to the kind of housing tenure. The government's term affordable rent, and there's also the related intermediate rent. This was introduced, affordable rent, in 2021, set at 80% of market rate, inclusive of charges. Intermediate rent is also available but at levels about 20% lower than the market rate, primarily to lower income households in London and the South East. We've got the London living rent, introduced to help middle income earners save for a deposit to purchase a house. We've got shared ownership, a form of tenure that all too often we're increasingly hearing is not so much a step up onto the housing ladder, but a great weight acting around the neck of people who are unable to escape from service charges, from unaffordable mortgages. We have the First Home Scheme, a kind of discounted market house, sale house, offered at a minimum reduction of 30% against the market value. We have to hope that there are not too many people in the age of the current level of mortgage rates who find that also a great burden. And I think we have to look at this in the context of how genuinely affordable housing, what you might has been termed a genuine living rent, can be calculated. The general rule is that households should not have to spend more than 30% of their monthly income on rent. That's in a broader frame of what's known as the 50-30-20 rule. Households should be able to spend 50% on their income on their needs, 30% on their wants, and have 20% available for paying off of debt or saving. My lords, there are very few households in the UK today who are in that situation, the situation that we should actually be aiming for. And if we look at some figures from the National Housing Association, Housing Federation, they estimate that by the end of the next Parliament, 1 in 5 households, more than 4.8 million households, will be forced to spend more than 30% of their income on rent. That's an increase on 30% on the figures now. And of course, the other end of this rather disastrous housing pipeline is rough sleeping. We all see this every day. We see this on the streets around your Lordship's house. There's been a 20% increase in rough sleeping in the last year and 280,000 households in temporary accommodation. So I've done the depressing stuff. I want to focus on the positive, just a hint of what's possible. And for this, I'm going to Lewis District Council, and I'm going to Fort Road in Lewis. In 2020, the council took a disused council office building there and replaced it with an award-winning block of 13 council-owned apartments, which provide safe, spacious, bright apartments with a very high level of building performance and a renewable energy strategy. Designed using fabric-first principles, they have a large solar photovoltaic array with 13 individual domestic batteries. That means that the electricity costs are estimated to be 60% below the normal. The house also, importantly, has fire safety features, which are currently not required but are anticipated for the future. Fireproof materials and cutting-edge suppression systems. These are not only affordable homes and quality homes, but very safe to live in, something we need to think more about. Now, I point to this because it's not just simply a one-off. I go to announcements made by the Green leader of Lewis District Council, Councillor Zoe Nicholson, who in March pointed out how the council has purchased brownfield land around the Peacehaven Golf Club and is hoping to also develop council-owned brownfield site in Ringmere. 24 homes on the Peacehaven site, more homes on these other sites. They're also looking at old garage sites, 11 locations that could see 45 new homes. And I focus on that, my lords, because both the Noble Lord Best and the Noble Lord Whitty focused on a centralised national approach to solving our housing crisis. Well, my lords, there's no doubt that resources and changing regulations and rules need to come from the centre, but my argument would be that we need to resource local authorities, local communities, to provide the housing they need in their local community according to their local desires, rather than something centrally enforced from the centre. But the need for change in the centre comes to one particular issue that I want to focus on in this speech, which is right to buy, which has been one of the enormous privatisations continued over decades under governments of different hues that has done great damage to our national social structure, our communities, and continues to do so. Because I spoke about the exciting things happening in Lewis. Well, similar things happened a few years ago in Norwich, in Goldsmith Street, where ultra-low energy passive house homes just outside the city centre were built in 2019 and won the Reba Sterling Prize for Architecture. But after 3 years, the tenants have the right to buy, and it now looks like that Norwich is going to lose a number of those homes, those brilliant social homes, to the private sector. And this, of course, is something that's happened to 2 million homes since 1980. Norwich has more than 4,000 people on the waiting list, and yet there and all around the country we are still losing more social homes than we are managed to build. So I've got a question to the Minister. What is the current rate of loss of social homes to right to buy? And I have a question that perhaps the Labor front bench might like to address. Why do they not plan to abandon this disastrous policy of privatisation? And I come now to some of the other costs of all of this. And I should perhaps declare my position as a Vice President of the Local Government Association at this point. Councils are spending $1.74 billion a year on temporary accommodation. This situation is a large part of the driver that is sending councils bankrupt. On LGA figures, 10,896 homes were sold in the last financial year under right to buy. Only 3,447 were replaced, a net loss of more than 7,000 homes. Since this scheme began, £7.5 billion has been handed out in discounts through right to buy. The kind of desperation this has left councils with, and I'm not sure many people know about this, but I think it's really worth highlighting. In desperation, Wandsworth Council in southwest London is offering £120,000 help to tenants to buy a house anywhere in the UK or anywhere in the world, provided it is not a council property. The council is so desperate to try to save its homes, it's offering people this very large sum of money. And I have to note that 4 in 10 of the homes sold off under right to buy are now owned by private landlords. I talked about the cost of temporary accommodation, but of course we also have the massive cost of now commercial level rents on what were council homes on which the state is having to put housing benefit. This, my lords, is just a clearly disastrous policy. And of course we knew that from the start, because the noble Lord Heseltine, back in the origins of this policy, said, and I quote, "No single piece of legislation has enabled the transfer of so much capital wealth from the state." This is, under that ideology, a description of we're reducing the size of the state. But of course what we are actually doing is making all of our communities and our societies much poorer. What we should be doing is moving towards a housing policy that treats homes as comfortable, affordable, secure places to live, not primarily as financial assets. So my final question to the noble Minister is community land trusts, cooperative housing, other alternative tenure models. I want to champion absolutely council housing, but there are other models that can protect from government policy of right to buy. What's the government doing to encourage those?
My Lords, I'm grateful to my noble friend Viscount Chandos for tabling this debate, and I congratulate the noble lady Baroness Smith of Cloudfine on a powerful and, if I may say so, very feisty speech. I was also very moved at just the sheer amount of responsibility that she's had to take on at so young an age. I'm looking forward very much to hearing more such contributions. My Lords, two events this week highlighted the timeliness and the importance of this debate. In the upper waiting room above Central Lobby, there's an exhibition of photographs of families living in temporary accommodation in the Manchester area. A mum with 3 kids says, "After I was evicted, the first temporary accommodation house was for 2 years. It's a long time. The school was 3 years away. If I was late or the kids couldn't get there, it looked bad for school reports and stuff." Another mum said, "When you look at other children, they're able to eat proper meals and things like that. My son's had infection after infection. Since we've moved after the hotels, I've been to A&E just under 15 times." My Lord, the exhibition is well worth seeing. It's organised by the APPG on homelessness. In opening it, Dame Siobhan McDonough MP urged the need for a long-term solution that crossed social divides and party policies. That plea was echoed in the second of the two events I referred to earlier, the launch of the Church of England's report Homes for All, a vision for England's housing system, which has been referred to by my noble friend and by the noble Lord Best. Echoing the conclusions of other reports, notably the National Housing Federation and Shelter, the report identified that the housing crisis continues to escalate, perpetuated by a lack of policy stability, ambition and urgency across successive governments, and a failure to connect the issues through a systematic and coordinated approach. The noble lady, the Minister, and indeed my noble friend Baroness Taylor of Stevenage both spoke eloquently at the event. My Lords, it's clear that a change in approach is needed. There are currently over 8 million people in England who can't access the housing they need. For 4.2 million of these, around 1.6 million households, social rented housing would be the most appropriate tenure to address that need. Our failure to deliver the homes we need is breaking down our communities. It's driving families and key workers into financial hardship and away from work, schools and support networks. Some groups of people are feeling this crisis even more acutely. Black, Asian and minority ethnic households and disabled people are more likely to experience homelessness or live in poor quality, unsuitable or overcrowded homes. Women's Aid point to the lack of affordable housing as a primary barrier to those escaping abuse. Yet despite our severe housing emergency, the supply of genuinely affordable housing is falling. Last year, 29,000 social homes were sold or demolished, and less than 7,000 were built. Many households are now forced to live in expensive, insecure, and often poor quality homes in the private rented sector. Most damning of all is the impact of this crisis on children. A record number of children are homeless and are forced to live in inadequate temporary accommodation, including bed and breakfast. This disrupts their education, affects their life chances, and puts huge pressure on families, as indeed the exhibition I referred to so graphically illustrates. 138,000 children are currently living in temporary accommodation, and this is estimated, my Lords, to rise to 310,000 by 2045 without government action. These figures are a stark illustration that a radical change in approach is urgently needed. I hope the Minister won't respond to this debate simply by asserting the work, a lot of good work, that the government is doing and the number of homes currently being built, because whatever the number, it simply isn't enough. I urge the Minister in her response to focus on the key question: how do we increase supply? For those at the sharp end of the housing crisis, we need to build 90,000 new social homes every year to keep up with demand. In 2010, the amount of grant funding available for new social housing was cut by 63%. The consequences of this decision have been dire. Does the Minister agree that we need a new long-term and substantial grant programme which can be used more flexibly to deliver new social homes, regenerate and refurbish existing homes, and acquire more existing homes where appropriate? Does the Minister agree that we need to have bold planning reforms to deliver the highest possible level of affordable housing, incorporating new, large, mixed tenure communities? My party recently announced proposals to allow Greybelt development, which includes 50% affordable housing, and this is a welcome step in the right direction. Does the Minister agree that government funding and fiscal rules need to be reviewed to incentivise long-term public investment in social housing? And I must ask the Minister to comment on the need to invest in a skilled workforce if this ambition is to be realised. Does she agree that the government must ensure there is resilience within the supply chain and workforce whilst unlocking innovation in the construction industry, which could include exploring new technology and supporting new methods of delivery? My Lords, there are huge economic benefits to be gained. We need to move away from the outdated idea that social housing is a drag on the public purse. In fact, it's a long-term driver of sustainable growth. Every pound investing in social housing delivers at least double that of wider economic benefits. Recent research from the National Housing Federation and Shelter, carried out by CEBR, showed the positive economic impact of building social housing. These include savings on housing benefit, reduced homelessness, increased employment, and improved healthcare. I've said before in other debates that building social homes that meet local need can offer stability in people's lives. This helps people to get and keep work and reduces the long-term scarring effect that being homeless or in temporary housing can have on employment prospects. It also supports children's education and the mental and physical health of families. I support the Archbishop of Canterbury's report in its call for an end to short-termism in housing policy and its advocacy for decent homes across England. As the report states, everyone should have a home that's comfortable and safe. Sadly, and to our shame, decades of piecemeal and short-term policy have left us with a failing housing system that's affecting our health and well-being and costing our country billions. It's also holding back our economy and making communities unsustainable. My Lords, the housing crisis is a complex problem. It will take long-term political commitment, investment and collaboration across government and with partners across the country. I echo the Noble Lord Best's call, reflected in the Church of England report, a call for a housing strategy committee modelled on this existing Climate Change Committee or the Low Pay Commission, which will hold the government to account. Does the Minister agree that to meet the scale of the challenge we face, there needs to be a comprehensive and policy-led long-term national plan agreed in its fundamentals across political parties, with the government in partnership with local authorities and the social housing sector? Perhaps then we can begin to solve this worsening housing crisis.
My Lords, I too thank Viscount Chandos for initiating this important debate, and I applaud the maiden address of Baroness Smith of Lanfess and assure her that the House will welcome now and will continue to welcome into the future her spirited advocacy, not least for Wales. I think the inadequacy of the UK's housing provision, adversely affecting most in our society, the middle classes as well as the poor, is our most pressing national problem. It is a problem, my Lords, many decades in the making, and I don't think we will resolve any specific aspect of housing difficulty without addressing the totality of housing provision in the round right across the United Kingdom. Around 300,000 people, I think the figures we're showing today vary a little. I'm sure we've all got good sources from them, but there are some slight differences. Around 300,000 people, including 200,000 children, are without a home and live in temporary accommodation, in shelters or with friends. 1 million households are on council waiting lists. According to the English Housing Survey, 4 million live in substandard homes in the oldest housing stock in Europe. 1/3 of under 34s still live with their parents now and struggle to buy a home. Home ownership overall is in decline. At the same time, our population is growing rapidly. In addition, more of us live longer, and young people form single-person households and marry later. For these many reasons and other reasons, overall demand for housing is increasing rapidly. Yet housing provision, my lords, as pretty much everybody has said, has manifestly not kept pace with growing demand. As I think Viscount Chandos was the first to remind us, just over 100 years ago, just after the First World War, the then government began building homes for heroes. Nobody's mentioned, I don't think, that in 1953, under a Conservative government, social housing build peaked at 200,000 units a year. I think this is the most remarkable statistic. Today, my lords, there are 2 million fewer units of social housing than there were 40 years ago. 2 million fewer units of social housing. So you don't have to look very far, my lords, to see at least one of the root causes of our housing malaise. What are we doing to close that awesome deficit? Not much, my lords. Local authority and housing association build in recent years has been of the order of a modest 20,000 units per year. A huge increase in private renting, doubling over two decades, has taken the strain, often with poor quality, under-invested housing. Many factors, and most have been mentioned, stand in the way of increased home building, including planning restraints, land hoarding, and shortages of skilled labour. Estimates of the scale of the overall housing gap, the gap between demand and supply, are in the region. The estimates vary, but they're all in the region between 1 and 2 million homes, and that is a measure of just how far behind we are from where we need to be. And despite the recent improvement in house building, it's a very, very long journey to get anywhere near to that 1 to 2 million homes gap. Lord Barwell put the issue simply and bluntly, and I think everybody here will agree, and I quote him, "Building more of every level of housing is what is needed." My lords, and again I echo what a number of others have said in this debate, this excellent debate so far, my lords, we need to take out a clean sheet of paper and to build a new housing strategy from scratch. What we've been doing in recent decades has simply not been working. We need to create a plan developed from a national, not from a regional or a local perspective just, not for housing, of course, in our precious green belt, but for housing near where people work, a strategy for housing close to services, housing well insulated with decarbonised heating, a strategy for housing of beauty, something which the UK has achieved brilliantly again and again in our history and must do so again. My lords, we will simply not solve our housing crisis overnight. It will take 10 to 15 years of systematic hard work to do that. But we will not resolve it at all without speedily framing, and others have said this already, a comprehensive national plan which addresses and deals with the many causes of our most pernicious national problem.
My Lords, I rise to pay my tribute to my noble friend for giving us the opportunity to address this very important issue, one that affects all of us, directly or indirectly, and to add my thanks also to the noble lady Baroness Smith of Llanfaes in Ynys Môn, who certainly made us aware of the fact that she will represent the interests of Wales during her time here, but perhaps the extra value will come from what she has to say about a generation that many of us have long left behind. So it's wonderful to welcome a fellow Welsh person and on such an important issue. Many speakers have quoted statistics of one kind or another, and some, by the weight of repetition, have brought home in a focused way the needs of the moment and the dire situation in which this whole area is dragged down. But one statistic that hasn't been mentioned is that we are in the year of the 16th housing minister since 2010. 16 housing ministers in 14 years is not something to glide over or to just have a chuckle about. It represents where housing sits in the agenda of this present government. And we must therefore, as gravely as we can, point to that. We would like to wish the present minister in our house long life in her present job, but there's a bit of me that doesn't want to go that far in this year of grace. Now, we have to admit that there have been initiatives attempted or implemented by the present government that we should at least recognise as pointing in a direction we all want to travel in. Initiatives, programmes, financial packages. But the House magazine, when it issued just a month ago, its focus on housing recognised that this is a moment of crisis when, and I quote, the government is facing unprecedented pressure over its housing record. I like to quote voices other than our own partisan voices to make the points that need to be made as being more general than simply the result of one's own party political position. The wonderful briefing notes that we had from the library omitted from the title of the report in general one word which is very integral to my noble friend's motion before us. The word genuinely affordable housing, the word genuinely was missed out. And others have mentioned, and quite properly, that affordable, if it just means 20% off the going rate, as it were, is certainly not affordable for the large majority of people. So genuinely simply has to claim its place in the phrasing of this motion and in our discussion of the issues it raises. House prices are 8.3 times higher than the median wage, which means that people, even with 20 or 30% discounts, are not going to be able easily to arrange mortgages or to pay rents. And we've heard how many of them have to resort to alternative forms of accommodation because housing is now beyond them. I've hesitated long and hard before putting my name down to speak in this debate because I've never owned a house in my entire life. I've lived in tied accommodation. And so many of the issues that are being mentioned here have never been within my direct experience. But I have 3 children, and these issues lie very definitely within the ambit of my children's generation. And they themselves have come up with mixed responses and abilities and inabilities to how to fashion a housing future for themselves. Now, it is admittedly a very complex area. National plans, national strategies have been mentioned again and again, and they would have to take in so many diverse and often conflictual strands of experience. The briefings that I've received, and I'm sure we've all received ahead of this debate, for example, from Women's Aid, about not forgetting the needs of those women who've been domestically abused, who will have housing needs. Then the news that there's no guarantee that no-fault evictions can be implemented before the election. Well, that took us all by surprise too, and affected radically the way we were thinking about that particular piece of legislation that's before us at the moment. And then the Residential Freehold Association, it came in, all guns firing, to have its own particular interests defended too. It's all left me feeling, in agreement with those who've said it already, that we do need some kind of bipartisan national effort for what is a universal need. It's no good my plan versus your plan, but our thinking together to achieve an outcome that will benefit, can only benefit, is the only way to benefit the world at large. Now, I've got just a couple of personal examples which I use not because of the personalities involved, but for illustrative purposes. I've been in conversation this week with a young person. I'm in conversation with them, though it's some time since I was young, who, having graduated during the COVID years and looking at his future in terms of his career and the rest of it, has received a very good offer to have a further degree in one of our prestigious universities. But as he says, unless he can find funding, with £48,500 worth of debt already, how does he do it? With £3,500 of that debt being the interest accrued on the debt last year. What's that all about? We are eliminating from the frame of young people's possibilities and needs in the punitive way that these things happen. And perhaps a bit more personal, if noble lords will permit me. My parents divorced when I was a child. I have still at home, I thought to bring it just to wave around, the letter from my father's lawyer, which ordered my mother and her boys out of the family home at 1 week's notice. It was October. The winter was nigh on. We had nowhere to go. In the little locality where I lived, various neighbours took us in for a week or a few days at a time, until my grandparents, who were caretakers in a factory, decided that they would share the 3 rooms that they lived in with my mother and her 2 boys. And so I was raised in one room in a brickyard. And I only mention this not to alarm people or to draw attention in some kind of pathos moment, but because I can never forget my mother's feelings, which were never expressed verbally: panic, fear, depression, and what the Centre for Economics and Business Research refers to as being the case for people who've gone through that, as long-term scarring. And long-term scarring is what people who've been thrown on the garbage heap carry with them for the rest of their lives. And I have to say that in my worst moments, I give evidence of it myself. And so I feel that we must keep in view the needs at large of young people, marginalized people, those who have no hope or stake in society, when we utter our fine words, analyze the statistics, and form the resolve But as a nation, we need to do better than we're doing right now.
Yeah. First, congratulations to the noble Baroness Lady Smith of Llanfaith. A tremendous speech, one I particularly welcome as someone with forebears from the beautiful island of Ynys or Anglesey, if you prefer, one of the most beautiful places in the world. I'm sure she's very welcome. I'm sure she will be a tremendous asset to this House. Thanks also to my noble friend Viscount Chandos for introducing this debate, for his and all the other contributions. Powerful case has been made. I very much hope, I'm looking forward to the Minister's reply. I hope the Minister, the noble lady, will adopt a constructive response to what's been said rather than just defending the government's record. We've got to look to the future, what needs to be done. Now, what I'm going to talk about is about the crying need for more council housing, especially but not necessarily for those on lower incomes. This need has become particularly increasingly critical given today's housing crisis, which has been so ably laid out by previous speakers. And I want to emphasise that I'm talking about council housing. This is housing which is publicly owned and subject to a degree of democratic accountability, where tenants have secure tenancies and rents are in general substantially lower than other forms of renting. As a result, as been argued by the all-party parliamentary group on council housing, it offers the only real opportunity for mass affordable rented housing in the whole of the UK. There's obviously a significant role for other forms of social housing, but the long-term sustainable solution to the problems we face relies on council housing. This is one of those areas of social policy, extraordinary, where we know what works, but for one reason or another, we're blind to what needs to be done. We were joined briefly, not with us now, but Lord Young of Cookham has made the point from the opposite benches about the success of the Macmillan programme for housing, and that depended on council housing. That wasn't private developers, that was council housing. The success of our new towns, which I hope my noble friend will refer to in winding up, that relied on council housing. We know it works. Council housing provided millions of families with their first opportunity of a decent family home. And for one reason or another, we choose to ignore that success. The changes we've seen in housing over the last decades has had the result of pushing low-income families into insecure, substandard housing, with overcrowding and, to an increasing and worrying extent, homelessness. The answer, council housing, has played a crucial role in ensuring a basic standard of living and security for all. Now, the case for expanding the use of council housing is grounded in both social justice and economic practicality. First, I believe that housing is a fundamental human right, crucial for personal stability and dignity and family life. By providing more council housing, governments can directly support those in need, fulfilling their basic responsibility towards their citizens. Secondly, as other speakers have mentioned, low-income families often spend a disproportionate amount of their earnings on housing, squeezing what's available for other essentials such as food, healthcare and education. More council housing with socially appropriate rents would increase disposable income levels, leading to greater consumer spending, more contentment in human life, but also economic growth. Thirdly, councils provide stable and affordable homes for low-income families, reducing the risks they face of homelessness and the associated social costs that come back on all of us. Finally, having a secure living environment can lead to better educational outcomes for children, greater employment opportunities for adults, and overall improved health for families. Not for nothing was the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Housing a single institution in the government following the last war. Good health requires and needs good housing. From a broader perspective, increased investment in council housing can stimulate the economy. Construction projects, which we face all too few at the moment, generate jobs, boost local businesses, and can lead to the revitalisation of undeveloped areas. Now, given the manifest need for more council housing, we have to talk about the adverse and malign effects of right to buy. Now, while the right to buy scheme has allowed many tenants to achieve home ownership and has been popular among those who have benefited from it, its long-term implications for the availability and the affordability of housing have been malign. Clearly, there has been this massive reduction that's been referred to in the stock of social housing, but we've seen that many of those properties that were sold to create this property-owning democracy have been bought up by commercial letting agents, and we end up with families still relying on rented accommodation, but provided more expensively and not of such a good standard by the private sector. It's led to a reduction in social cohesion, an adverse, not time today to go through the full details, but an adverse effect on the financial stability of local authorities, one of the major factors why local authorities are facing the problems they do currently, and of course lengthening housing lists, people in need of accommodation. Now, to address this problem, we do require a comprehensive strategy involving the multiple stakeholders that are involved. But government at all levels must commit to long-term funding and policy support for council housing development. Public support is essential. Community involvement in planning and decision-making can ensure that developments meet local needs and integrate well with existing neighbourhoods. A particular issue I emphasise the importance of cottage estates. That's the sort of housing that people want to live in. All too often the financial rules on development of new housing force the building of flats, which are fine for some, but where people, a great majority of people want to live, are in the cottage estates that we built between the wars, we built during the 50s, but for some reason are no longer being built in the numbers that people require. It's a matter of some concern that the award-winning development Goldsmith Street in Norwich, built as council housing, award-winning Sterling Prize, that is now going to be sold off to the private sector to the right to buy. This simply has to stop. To conclude, increasing the availability of council housing is a pivotal step towards addressing the housing affordability crisis and the support which is required for low-income families. Not only will it provide the basic need for shelter, but will serve as an economic catalyst and promote social equity. By prioritising this approach, governments can make significant strides towards a more stable and just society.
My Lords, if I may, in the gap, just say a few brief words. I'm delighted to follow the noble Lord Davis of Brixton. He's brought some passion into this debate, and rightly so. And I identify with that passion, having just read the book, This Boy, by Alan Johnson, the former Labour Minister in the previous Labour government, and the way that he and his sister fought to try and secure a place to live after they lost their mother in the 1950s in London. Going back to that would be a disgrace, and we have to ensure that never happens. My Lords, I rise primarily, of course, to pay great and warm congratulations to my noble friend, and it's nice to be able to say my noble friend in the narrow rather than the broad sense of the word here in this chamber. Congratulations on a memorable maiden speech, and if I may say, I hope that she will inspire many more of her generation and that's across party political boundaries, to follow her lead and to find a way to get their voice heard in this chamber. We need that spectrum that includes all the ages that can participate and can educate us. May I thank the noble Viscount Chandos for facilitating this short debate, and particularly his kind reference to my constituency predecessor, David Lloyd George. The fight for social justice was one that ran through in the early decades of this century, as in the 50s and 60s, and it's one that, of the last century, and it's one that we have to obviously grasp again. My Lords, when I first entered Parliament 50 years ago, as my noble friend so graphically described, housing remains a pressing issue, particularly for young people, and it's good to have a persuasive voice for young people in this chamber, and one who can speak effectively for the needs of Wales and, of course, of Plaid Cymru. I am glad to welcome the noble Baroness Smith of Llanfaes to her place in this chamber, congratulate her on her maiden speech, and hope that we hear much more from her on these social issues, as well as the battles facing us in Wales.
My Lords, first I should draw attention to the Declaration of Interests, since I do work in housing and planning in various ways, and it is an immense interest of mine. That work came out of policy reviews for successive governments in this arena. Before I turn to the issue at hand, I do want to address a few comments to Baroness Smith, both for an excellent maiden speech. I remember making my own in the other place rather a long time ago, as then the youngest Member of Parliament just elected. I think she may possibly match one record that I think I still have, which is 10 years later I was still the youngest Member of Parliament. And I have a suspicion she may achieve something similar in this place, but we will see. And then just one word of advice. One comes in and people think of you as radical because you're young. By the time passes, you're no longer young, but it's very important to remain radical. I have always been a firm believer that the people who should be here or there, or in any other form of public life, should be those who really want to change things. And holding on to that is not always easy when you're the beneficiary of the establishment. So I hope, I think she will from her speech, she will remember that. Anyway, turning to change. It is clear from the speeches from across the House how much concern there is, irrespective of party, about the difficulties people have finding a home. It can be addressed as affording a home, but the truth is it's finding a home, because there are literally millions of people in this country who don't have the home that they would wish. Much of that is hidden. It is young adults living with their parents far beyond the time that they used to. It is people in inappropriate small accommodation who need larger family accommodation. It is people in flats with children who deserve gardens. It is people in houses of multiple occupation, each of whom should really have their own home. And there is a really simple, fundamental reason for this. And it is not addressed simply by saying, oh, well, the planning system's not really the problem, it's the developers, or we need to have more affordable homes. The fundamental underlying reason for this is that we have not been building enough homes for decades. And not building enough by a small amount, but not building enough by a very large amount. In the last decade, for all the government has done, we are about 1 million homes short of what we know needed to be built. In the decade before that, we were another 1 million homes short, at least, of the numbers that we knew were to be built. And whilst the 300,000 is pretty much universally acclaimed, let's remember what it's built of. Around 250,000 of that is merely addressing the demographic need, and the remaining 50,000, which comes originally from work by Kate Barker in 2 reviews, was a very slow process of building back that undersupply that at that time was 1 million or so homes over a decade, and there's now 2 million homes over 2 decades. So 300,000 is only a slow progress over many, many years to address the under-provision that has taken place over so long. Kate talks about there's only so fast you can go without causing an impact on house prices that would then destabilise household finances, and that is properly right. But the truth is we're coming nowhere near to what needs to be provided. And what I want to do with just the remaining time that I have is very briefly try to address the history of this. Because between the 2 great wars, we were delivering enough homes. It was largely done through the private sector, but also the Homes Fit for Heroes and the rest of it. And part of the reason we were doing that was that there was, of course, a ready supply of land, because anyone who owned land could build on it or sell it to be built on. The problem with that was that as people no longer had to walk from home to work, home to shop, as people became able to move more freely, you saw the spread of suburbanisation around towns and cities, coastlines being built up, countryside being built. And that was why, after campaigning by people like the CPRE, we saw the Planning Acts introduced in the 1940s. But when they introduced the Planning Acts, they knew full well what the impacts would be of restricting the ability to build, so they set out a very clear strategy to make sure enough homes are built. First, you would renew the bombed-out cities and the slums. So, in effect, a form of brownfield first, urban renewal. But not urban renewal with densification and towers. Actually, it was on garden city principles of removing the dense slums and actually giving people homes that were decent, homes that were gardens. And you see that in London and the other cities around the UK. We seem to have forgotten that lesson, because what we're building today is not fit for families as we densify and go up and build flats. I don't know how many members of the House of Lords choose to live in a flat as their main home. I suspect some do for second homes. But I asked the question when I did a planning review, at a time when 45%, and it will be similar now, of all homes being built were flats, what proportion of the public didn't have to live in a flat because that's all they could afford, or it was a moment in their lifetime, but how many actually wanted to? And the answer was 45% were being built as flats and just over 1% wanted to. This is a country where, particularly when you go through the stages of family life, you want access to garden and open space. There, of course, there's a role for flats. There is in every country. But we also need to remember that those buildings turn to slums very quickly when people are in them who cannot afford to maintain them. Councils couldn't maintain them. Housing associations struggle to maintain them because over time they need lift shafts renewed, they need heating systems renewed, they need windows renewed. All of that is enormously expensive for these properties. So I really fear that we have forgotten that the last time we did that, they turned to slums, and they will, I fear, turn again to slums, particularly those that offer into the private sector to buy on buildings that have been built with a 40 or 50-year lifespan and no intention of renewing them in the long run. The second thing that they did was they wanted urban renewal around the edges, but they understood that you didn't want parasitic development that had no facilities, poor quality housing, that destroyed historic communities, the towns and villages and cities that we love. So they wanted planned urban extensions that would have facilities, schools, hospitals, shops, neighbourhoods, as we understand here we are in London. We all understand the process of city by neighbourhood, each neighbourhood in walking distance of the facilities you need for everyday life. And that's how they planned those urban extensions. But we've forgotten that, because when we build housing estates with no facilities at all, cut off from the shops and schools. We talk about them as sustainable extensions, but they're anything but. They're just dormitories for people with cars and no facilities, people struggling to get a dentist or a doctor's place, to find the school on the other side of town, everyone having to drive because all the facilities are scattered across. And then the third thing they said was that if you built well in the cities and the urban centres on the brownfield sites, there wouldn't be enough homes. If you built well in the urban extensions around the towns and the cities, but respected people's desire to remain historic places, there wouldn't be enough homes. So you needed as well to create new communities using the ideas of Ebenezer Howard and the New Towns programme. Why do we forget that lesson? Because it's what we need today. The answer is that in the late 70s we built enough homes. It worked, and we stopped. And when the demographics started to go up again because people lived longer in their own homes, more migration started again, more babies were born, we forgot all those lessons and just started to try and do towers in cities, little urban housing estates around the edge, pretending that you could deliver communities by delivering a minimum number of homes. We need to go back to the origins of planning and plan long-term for place and how places evolve, and stop fighting about whether it's 20, 30, 40 or 50 homes this year or next.
My Lords, can I add my welcome to the Noble Baroness Smith of Clanvice, or Croeso, and thank her for her excellent speech. I don't share your youth, sadly, or your hair colour, or I may have done back in the day, or your Doc Martens, but I did grow up in a council house as you did, and I share your strong passion for housing. I think you'll find there's quite a good housing, cross-party housing coalition in your Lordship's house, and I look forward to working with you on that. And can I thank my noble friend, Viscount Chandos, for bringing such an important debate before your Lordship's house today, and all noble lords who have spoken. Viscount Chandos gave an excellent, thorough and cogent introduction to this very important debate. Now, I want to start by emphasising the words in the title of the debate, genuinely affordable housing, as did my noble friends Lord Whitty, Lord Griffiths and Baroness Warwick. Because unfortunately the term affordable housing has become widely misused in recent years. For example, in last week's short debate relating to my question on right to buy receipts and how they should be used, in my view, entirely to replace the social housing from which they accrue, the noble Baroness, the Minister, seemed to use the term affordable housing and social housing as though they were interchangeable. They are not. Particularly the rather dubious definition of affordable housing used by this government, which includes 6 categories of housing, only one of which would be affordable on average wages in my area. Shelter tell us that the focus for the definition of affordable housing should be on social housing, which is the only housing with rent pegged to local incomes, which is resilient to local fluctuations in house prices, and which is usually the most affordable type of housing. It also provides secure tenancies, which enable people to be able to secure employment and establish themselves in communities. And can I say, by the way, I in no way intend to be personally critical of the noble Baroness, the Minister, in my comments. I've met many
any of the succession of housing ministers we've had since 2010. I think they've now been 16, which doesn't help. And this conflation of affordable and social housing happens more often than not. I know that she is committed to using her time in housing to improve matters where she can. The government definition means even a private house selling for over £300,000 can be designated affordable, when for residents in my area with an average wage of about £35,000 it is absolutely not affordable, and homes now cost 8 times average salary. The average 3-bedroom private rented home in my area costs £1,400 a month. That would mean almost 60% of average income used for housing costs. No wonder we have a cost of living crisis. In contrast, a 3-bedroom council home in my area costs £524 a month. But my noble friend Viscount Chandos is right to point out that the extraordinary stranglehold this government have put on local government has hollowed out both planning functions and housing development teams. But we know the building of social homes has fallen off a cliff. Last year, 29,000 social homes were sold or demolished, including over 10,000 right-to-buy sales, and only 7,000 were built. We have 1.2 million on housing waiting lists and 1.4 million fewer families in social housing than there were in 1980. The cost of this falls significantly on the taxpayer in housing benefit, and secondly on council taxpayers, with £1.7 billion for the cost of temporary and emergency accommodation last year. The outstanding report by CEBR for the National Housing Federation and Shelter, as well as flagging the impressive £51.2 billion benefit to the economy that would accrue from building 90,000 social homes, pointed to the social benefits of stable, secure tenancies in relation to employment, healthcare, helping people out of the vicious cycle of temporary and emergency accommodation, lower crime, and the education benefit for children and young people. This crisis in social housing delivery is just one of the factors impacting on the affordability of housing. And I agree with my noble friend Lord Davis, good housing should be a human right. As we have heard, there are many others, including housing supply, and the government caving in over housing targets at the end of last year didn't help, and the imbalance of demand, the planning system and its failure to deliver against housing need, quality and sustainability, and the need to meet higher environmental standards, which we welcome but is causing a slowdown. In the excellent report mentioned by Viscount Chandos and Noble Lords Best, Whitty and Baroness Warwick, by the Church of England Homes for All this week, the need for a comprehensive housing strategy setting out a vision for the next 20 to 30 years is set out very powerfully, and I agree with it. The failure to have a vision for housing and a clear plan of how it should be implemented is at the heart of this issue and reflects many of the discussions in Parliament recently. And that's why we've ended up with a bill to ban leasehold that ignores 70% of leasehold properties in this country, which are flats. Neither does it scrap the scandalous money for nothing regime of ground rent. And we will shortly have a renters reform bill which was intended to ban Section 21 evictions, but will not do so because in spite of years in the planning, there are just not the mechanisms in the place to make the change. And there can be no greater indictment of 14 years of Tory housing policy than 142,000 children in temporary and emergency accommodation. My Lords, after the Second World War, there was a Labour government with a real vision on housing, especially to replace the slums and other housing that have been destroyed across the country, with new developments designed to support communities and with all the facilities those communities would need. My town, Britain's first new town, was the first post-war manifestation of that vision, which built on the tradition of the pre-war garden cities. And I won't pretend this was easy. The tradition of the NIMBY goes back a very long way. In fact, I found an example from 1539, but I'll leave that one for now. But poor John Silkin, the housing minister in 1946, arrived in the small market town of Stevenage, population around 6,000, to tell them at a very noisy public meeting that the new town would add 60,000 homes. He found the railway station sign for Stevenage had been replaced with one saying Silkingrad. Let us hope that better consultation and collaboration can avoid those situations in the future. So it's time to be bold and visionary again. It's time to get Britain Britain Building to enable millions to plan their lives, to start families, build a future for themselves and their kids. It's time to meet the needs of those who are aspirational to own their own home and those for whom social housing will be the only affordable option. It's time to make sure key workers can live wherever they work across the country. They are our heroes, as Viscount Chandos has said, and that they can have the high-quality housing they deserve. And it's time to get the economic benefit that can come from reinvigorating construction and development, giving investors the confidence they seek by focusing on the builders, not the blockers, and ensuring SME builders get the support they need. That's why my party has set out our vision to get Britain building again with a package of reforms to the planning system, to build 1.5 million homes over the next Parliament alongside our 5 golden rules. And I'll take no lessons from the Green Party, who say one thing in this chamber as their councillors are blocking building all over the country. Our plan includes a housing recovery plan, a blitz of planning reform to quickly boost house building, to buy and rent, and deliver the biggest boost to affordable housing in a generation, ensuring local people have a say in how housing is built, with communities confident that the plans they have worked on will be delivered. The next generation of new towns, hooray, says this new town girl, new communities with beautiful homes, green spaces, reliable transport links and bustling high streets, and with those local development corporations described by the Noble Lord best. Unleashing mayors, a package of devolution with stronger powers over planning and control over housing investment. And a planning passport for urban brownfield development with fast-track approval and delivery of high-density housing on urban brownfield sites. And prioritising those poor quality and ugly areas of Greenbelt so they become grey belt, which will protect the nature-rich, environmentally valuable land in the Greenbelt. And those plans for Greybelt must target at least 50% affordable housing. First dibs for first-time buyers, supporting younger people, the first chance at homes in new housing developments with a government-backed mortgage scheme. And I will end with a quote from the preface of Homes for All. What could that vision look like? An end to the stress and worry of being locked out of home ownership. Everyone having a safe, warm home that supports their health. Homes for all that release the constraints of poverty. All of us going to our later years with a sense of dignity that comes from a secure place to live. Every child having the stable foundation they need to thrive. So whoever is entrusted with the confidence of the British people at the general election, they will have a huge amount of work to do, and some of it will have to be done as a matter of urgency. So let's have the election and get on with it.
Yeah. May I start by thanking the Noble Lord Viscount Chandos for introducing the debate on this topic for more affordable homes, and indeed to reassure the Noble Lord Griffiths and others that I'm not concerned about my personal career on the basis I'm covering 6 months maternity leave, and therefore I will be leaving this position in September, given that I'm covering my noble friend, the Minister Baroness Penn's leave while she spends some time with her newborn son. I'd like to also welcome the noble lady Baroness Smith of Llanfaes to his lordship's house and to congratulate the Baroness on her maiden speech. Croeso i'r Baroness Smith o Llanfaes I dir arglwyddi a llongyfarchiadau ar aeth bron olf. That was awful, but my mother will not forgive me for that pronunciation. I'd also like to thank all other noble lords who have spoken in this afternoon's debate, who have raised important points, which I certainly hope to address in my response today. And we all agree with the need for more affordable, high-quality homes in this country to meet growing demand. The government recognises the real pressures facing the housing market right now, and as noble lords, including Lords Griffiths, Baroness Taylor, have said, full-time workers in England expect to spend some 8 times their annual earnings buying a home, and the private sector rents have also increased by an average of 8% over the last 18 months. We also recognise that housing providers are facing a more challenging financial position, and so the government continuously works with its delivery agencies to ensure that the Affordable Homes programme can still deliver effectively in light of this. And all of this underscores the need for more homes of all tenures, homes to rent, homes to buy, and homes to part buy, affordable homes which the average working family can comfortably live in. This is the ambition that underpins the £11.5 billion Affordable Homes programme launched in 2020. This represents a significant investment by the government in affordable housing and a clear commitment to deliver tens of thousands of affordable homes for both sale and rent throughout the country. I'll briefly outline how and why they've been broken down and how that Affordable Homes programme in different tenures gives us the results. Starting with social rent, because I think, as do many in this House, and we recognise that these are the vital homes that we need to build to maintain thriving communities. And so eloquently stated by numerous noble lords, homes for social rent are a fundamental part of our housing stock. Indeed, a lifeline for those who would struggle to secure and maintain a home at market rates. So with that in mind, it was right for us to bring social rent homes into the scope of the Affordable Homes programme, which the government did in 2018. And since then, we have affirmed our commitment to increase the supply of social rented homes in our Levelling Up white paper, which, while improving the quality of housing across the board in both the social and private rental sector. And we've also changed the parameters for the Affordable Homes programme to support this commitment, enabling further increases to the share of social rented homes we're delivering. Furthermore, the Affordable Homes programme is committed to funding a mix of tenures, enabling developers to deliver mixed communities. For that reason, we've also kept a commitment to delivering homes for affordable rent as part of the programme. Whereas social rent is calculated using a formula which takes into account regional earnings, homes for affordable rent is where rent is capped at 80% of the market rate, or indeed lower in London. This is an important way to support mixed communities with different tenures in new developments, and it enables the programme to build more of the affordable homes this country needs because they need less subsidy than homes let at social rent. Although social rent and affordable rent are clearly key elements to our approach, we also are supporting aspiring homeowners to take their first step on the housing ladder. And we understand what a difference that increased sense of security can make in all aspects of someone's life and the lives of their family. That is why home ownership continues to be a fundamental part of the Affordable Homes programme offer, and we will continue to deliver a significant number of homes for shared ownership. This builds on our record to date of helping hard-working families to buy homes under shared ownership and build real capital in their properties. Between 2010 and 2023, we've delivered 156,800 new shared ownership homes, and our ambition is to build tens of thousands more as the Affordable Homes programme gathers pace. And since 2010, we've delivered over 696,000 new affordable homes, including over 482,000 affordable homes for rent, of which 172,600 homes are for social rent. To put this into perspective, the overall number of new homes during this period has been 2.5 million. Local authorities are a critical part of delivering on the Levelling Up white paper commitment to increase the supply of social housing over time. And we are empowering them with flexibilities to make locally led decisions that deliver the best possible deal for their communities. In 2022-23, local authorities delivered over 8,900 affordable homes, representing 14% of the overall affordable housing delivery and the highest recorded number of local authority completions since 1991-92. And to support continued delivery, in March last year we announced that local authorities will now have access to a new concessionary Public Works Loan Board interest rate for council house building from June this year. And affordable housing is not just delivered through our Affordable Homes programme. Around half of all delivery each year is delivered through the planning system. As the Noble Lords will be aware, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act gives the government powers to create the new infrastructure levy, which aims to capture even more land value uplift than the current system, continuing our drive to deliver more affordable housing. I'd like to reassure the Viscount Chandos that government is committed to the delivery of on-site affordable housing through the new levy and to delivering more affordable housing than the current system of developer contributions. Under the existing system, negotiation of Section 106 planning obligations can cause significant delay and uncertainty, which often means less affordable housing for communities and uncertainty about when key infrastructure is going to be provided. The new levy will be mandatory, non-negotiable change. It will be clear to developers that what they're expected to pay, and this change can be used to secure the delivery of on-site affordable housing as a non-negotiable in-kind contribution, which offers significant protection of affordable housing delivery over the present system. And the technical consultation to inform the design of the levy regulations closed at the end of the year, and we are currently analysing consultation responses, and I'm hoping that the passage of that Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, government is committed to consult again on the design of that infrastructure levy, and so we will actually get this working to deliver more homes. Finally, it's worth noting that councils continue to benefit not just from the £11.5 billion affordable homes programme we've discussed today, but also the scrapping of the housing revenue account borrowing cap and greater flexibility in how they can use receipts from the right to buy sales. And I strongly urge councils to make full use of these measures so we see more homes being built in the places where they're needed the most. I'm going to turn to a number of questions.
Can I just make a brief intervention? Can I ask the Noble Baroness, the Minister? She's once again using the term affordable homes. Does she mean under the current 6 definitions of affordable homes, 5 of which are not affordable to anyone where I come from? And can she confirm that we will continue to have a permitted development regime that doesn't deliver any affordable homes at all?
I will bring the question forwards that I was about to answer in response to both Baroness Taylor and indeed Lord Whitty, who asked as to how I define affordable. The government does not prescribe a definition of affordability. We recognise that the fundamental purpose of social housing is to provide affordable, safe and secure homes to those who cannot afford to rent or buy through the open market. And the purpose is reflected in the definition of affordable housing in the National Planning Policy Framework. And the definition, this defines affordable housing as housing for sale or rent for those whose needs are not met by the market. So to fall within the definition, homes must meet one or more other conditions. For example, affordable housing for rent must have rents that are set in accordance with the government's rent policy for social rent or affordable rent, or alternatively have terms that are at least 20% below the market rates. So it's a very broad definition because there are lots of tenures, there are lots of people providing this housing for the different audiences that require it. With regards to planning reform that noble lords, including Noble Viscount Chandos, Noble Lord Best and Baroness Taylor have mentioned, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act of 2023 creates a simplified and strengthened plan-led system, and the Act puts local people at the heart of development, and this, we hope, will deliver more homes in a way that works for more communities. Turning to questions that were put to me by Lord Best, but I would like to reassure that social housing stock has grown over 151,000 homes since 2010, compared to the previous 15 years when it fell by over 420,000. So we have a big gap to make up, and we're aware of that. With regards to the Affordable Homes Programme, it currently allows for 30% of the homes in the programme to be delivered through acquisitions. And in practice, this tends to be the conversion of new homes that would otherwise have been sold on the open market to alternative affordable tenure types. I would like to turn to the temporary accommodation, which many of noble lords have mentioned. And indeed, when it comes to this, the government is committed to reducing the need for temporary accommodation by preventing homelessness before it occurs. However, the current global context, the significant economic challenges we are facing, is making our objectives on homelessness more challenging. We remain committed to preventing homelessness where possible and helping people to stay in their homes. And since 2022, we've provided £104 billion in cost of living support, an average of £3,700 per UK household, helping those most in need whilst actively acting in a fiscally responsible way. And where homelessness cannot be prevented, temporary accommodation is an important way of ensuring no family is without a roof over their heads. However, we appreciate it is not ideal and needs to be temporary. The £1.2 billion Local Authority Housing Fund enables councils in England to obtain better quality temporary accommodation for those owed a homelessness duty, providing a lasting, affordable housing asset for the future. And indeed, between 2022 and 2025, we're providing local authorities with over £1.2 billion through the Homelessness Prevention Grant. With regards to addressing the Noble Baroness Smith's concerns, there are mechanisms by which social housing tenants can receive housing support to help pay their rent. For these tenants, the cost of rent increases are met by their housing benefit or indeed the housing element of their universal credit. And discretionary housing payments can be made to those entitled to housing support who face a shortfall in meeting their housing costs. With regards to social rent levels, they typically are at between 50 and 60% of market rents, set in accordance with government rent policy for social rent, using a formula that accounts for relative county earnings. And indeed, 90% of the stock is done through social rent. With regards to affordable rents, they make up some 10% of the rental stock, and they are actually available at 80% of the market value, though that 80% number is much lower in parts of London. So we're talking the difference between some £98 per week under social rent and £143 per week, though all of the social benefits and the DWP benefits are not specific to the tenure. With regards to the right to buy, in response to the Noble Lady Baroness Bennett and indeed Lord Burt and Lord Davis, the government believes that our housing market should work for everyone. We do believe that those who want to rent their homes can rent their homes, but those who wish to buy them should also be allowed to do so. And we remain committed to the right to buy, which, as was mentioned, since 1980 has helped over 2 million people from social housing tenants to become homeowners. We want to support councils to continue to deliver new and existing supply plans, and there is a requirement for replacement homes to actually be put in place as these are sold. To help councils deliver more replacement homes in the current economic context, the government has frozen the cap on acquisitions. Councils will be able to continue to deliver up to 50% of their right to buy replacement homes as acquisitions each year until 2025, with a focus on the purchase of new build homes. And from the 1st of April 2024, the government is also increasing the percentage of the cost of replacement affordable homes that can be funded from the right to buy receipts from 40% to 50%. We've listened to calls from councils to increase this cap, which some have said is making some build schemes unviable due to higher build costs. With regards to the statistics that Noble Lady Baroness Bennett asked for, in 2022-2023, local authorities sold 10,896 homes. They built 8,900. With all sources of affordable homes considered, there was a net increase of 14,680 affordable homes for rent. With regards to Baroness Warwick, I agree, we need to do more. All measures to increase the rate of house building for the provision of affordable homes should be being considered. And we are including things like the preferential borrowing rate for those council house buildings from the Public Works Loan Board, and which we've extended to June 2025. We've tried to allow them to retain, on a temporary measure, 100% of their right to buy receipts for 2022, 23, 23, 24. And indeed, we've actually increased therefore allowed them to increase their capital buffer to provide more homes in the short term. Abolition of the housing revenue account borrowing cap alongside the 11.5 billion affordable homes programme, I hope means that local authorities and housing associations are supported to maximise the delivery of new homes, and we strongly urge them to mobilise and utilise these flexibilities in order to do it quickly. I have another question from Baroness Borwick of Undercliff, who asked me about the skill set with regards to the construction. And indeed, the government is recognising that there are challenges in the sector due to skill shortages in the house building workforce and construction more broadly, which will become a greater challenge without active work to augment skills development. We are therefore committed to ensuring that the right skills and training is available for apprentices and others considering a career in the construction industry. And for example, the government is currently reviewing the work of the industry training boards and will be publishing the findings of these reviews along with any recommendations later this year. And the Department for Education is improving training routes into construction, creating opportunities for workers to retrain, and the government is increasing the funding for apprenticeships across the sectors, including construction, to 2.7 billion in the 2024-25 period. Turning to the report that was sent and came into all our inboxes, I believe, from Women's Aid earlier this week, it is absolutely critical that victims of domestic abuse get support, and especially when they are in housing need. The Domestic Abuse Act of 2021 has given those who are homeless as a result of being a victim of domestic abuse priority need for accommodation secured by the local authority. Statutory guidance encourages local authorities to make exceptions from any residency requirements. I will also, no doubt, be having numerous discussions at this dispatch box over the coming weeks as we now bring forwards the private rentals reform bill to this House. I understand we will have that on Tuesday next week, and so I look forward to discussing the details with many of you then. So in closing, I just want to thank you for prompting this important debate. It's clear that while we may disagree on different approaches, all of us here agree on its underlying mission to drive up affordable housing supply, truly affordable housing for those that need it. This is a clear part of our mission to level up the country. Indeed, it was a key tenet to our Levelling Up White Paper, and the figures I've outlined today, over 632,000 affordable homes built since 2010, show that we are making real progress towards it. But I agree, more needs to be done. Today, we've also discussed the wide-ranging challenges that are actually facing us, and indeed the changes the government has made and continues to make to boost the social housing numbers over the medium to long term. Of course, through our Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill and the Simplified Infrastructure Levy, these will take time, but I hope you will actually work with me and with the rest of government to ensure that this is an issue that cuts across party political lines, and it's one I'm certainly committed to working on with the noble lords across this House, as I said earlier this week at the Church of England launch of their report. Working together, I'm confident that we can get the right homes built in the right places for the people who need them the most.
My Lords, I'd like to thank all the speakers who've made such extraordinary contributions today. I think I can show that appreciation best by speaking extremely shortly now. But I have to say I'm in awe of the noble Baroness Lady Smith. I will leave her place name out this time because I believe she's scoring us English on our Welsh pronunciation, and I don't want to confirm my position as at the bottom of the list. My street credibility with my Welsh friends will be enormously enhanced by having been privileged to have the noble Baroness speak in this debate. One of them who shares her hair colour but is living in Seattle. She said, "Oh, how could a girl from the valleys manage to go and work somewhere where it rains even more?" There's been an extraordinary diversity of knowledge and views expressed, but I think a sort of common theme, which is the scale of the problem and the crisis. And I think my noble friend, Lady Warwick of Undercliff, posed it best, as posed the question to the noble Baroness, the Minister, which is, whatever your briefing, can you give the House the confidence that the government really appreciates the scale of the crisis and what needs to be done? And with due respect to the noble Baroness, the Minister, and acknowledging the box that she has to work in, I think the jury is out, at least, as to whether that sense of urgency has really been recognised and communicated today. But with that, my lords, I beg leave to move.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. As many as have that opinion shall say content. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it. My lords, we now move to the Terrorism Act 2000, Prescribed Organisations, Amendment Number 2, Order 2024. Lord Sharp of Epsom.
My lords, I beg to move that the Terrorism Act 2000 Prescribed Organisations Amendment Number 2, Order 2024, which was laid before this House on the 22nd of April, be approved. My lords, I'm grateful to the House for its consideration of this draft order, which will see the Terrorism Collective prescribed. It may be helpful if I set out some background on the prescription power. Some 80 terrorist organisations are currently prescribed under the Terrorism Act of 2000. For an organisation to be prescribed, the Home Secretary must believe that it is concerned in terrorism as set out in Section 3 of the Terrorism Act 2000. If the statutory test is met, the Home Secretary must then consider the proportionality of prescription and decide whether or not to exercise their discretion. Prescription is a powerful tool with severe penalties, criminalising membership and invitations of support for the organisation. It also supports other disruptive activity, including immigration disruptions and terrorist financing offences. The resources of a prescribed organisation are terrorist property and are therefore liable to be seized. The Home Secretary is supported in their decision-making advice by from the Cross-Government Prescription Review Group. A decision to prescribe is only taken after great care and consideration, given its wide-ranging impact, and it must be approved by both houses. Part 2 of the Terrorism Act of 2000 contains the prescription offences in sections 11 to 13. An organisation is prescribed if it is listed in Schedule 2 to that Act, or in most cases it operates under the same name as an organisation so listed. The government assesses that the Terrorism Collective operates as an organisation in accordance with the guidance on the meaning of that term found in Section 121 of the Terrorism Act 2000. This is based on the level of direction provided by its core leadership for the preparation of propaganda campaigns and the coordination between the network to disseminate the terrorist content to advance their neo-fascist, accelerationist ideology. Article 2 of this order adds the Terrorism Collective to the list in Schedule 2 as a new entry. My lords, having carefully considered all of the evidence, the Home Secretary has concluded that the Terrorism Collective is concerned in terrorism and should be prescribed. Noble lords will, I'm sure, understand that I'm unable to comment on specific intelligence. Nevertheless, I can provide the House with a summary of the group's activities. The Terrorism Collective is a transnational online network of neo-fascist terrorists who produce and disseminate violent propaganda with the aim of radicalising readers and encouraging individuals to commit acts of terrorism. The Terrorism Collective's aim is to bring about the collapse of Western democracy and erase war through violent acts of terrorism. The Terrorism Collective has published 3 long-form magazine-style publications, as well as a 24-minute documentary video. This propaganda is designed to incite violence towards perceived representatives of the establishment, ethnic minorities, and other minority or religious communities. They also celebrate and glorify the attacks committed by extreme right-wing terrorists who Terrorism considers to be saints and encourage readers to commit similar attacks. The propaganda also includes instructional material to build and use weapons. The Home Secretary has determined that the Terrorism Collective is an organisation which is concerned in terrorism. The Terrorism Collective is involved in preparing for terrorism through the inclusion of instructional material in their propaganda. They also promote and encourage terrorism through their publications, which contain violent narratives and material which glorifies previous extreme right-wing attackers, such as the perpetrator of the attack on a Slovakian LGBTQ+ bar in October 2022, which resulted in the murder of 2 people who credited Terrorgram's publications in his manifesto. The Terrorism Collective encourages those who consume the content to commit similar actions, hailing the perpetrators as saints, viewing LGBTQ+ symbols as desirable targets for such abhorrent attacks. Terrorism hold vile anti-Semitic views alongside other repulsive extreme right-wing ideologies. This organisation has published propaganda material with the aim of inciting violence against the Jewish community and has celebrated Hamas's attacks on Israel and their use of terrorist violence. They have endorsed the use of terrorism to target the Jewish community and Israel, which is completely unacceptable. According to open source reporting, they go so far as to advocate for attacks on Israeli critical national infrastructure and have swapped notes on how to undermine Israel's Iron Dome air defence. This prescription will further demonstrate our unwavering commitment to fighting anti-Semitism, which has increased sharply in recent months, and our unfaltering support for the Jewish community. My Lords, prescription is a powerful tool. It is a criminal offence for a person to belong to a prescribed organisation, invite or express support for a prescribed organisation, arrange a meeting in support of a prescribed organisation, or wear clothing or carry or display articles in public in such a way or in such circumstances as to arouse reasonable suspicion that the individual is a member or supporter of a prescribed organisation. The penalties for conviction of prescription offences can be a maximum of 14 years in prison and/or an unlimited fine. So, my Lords, the safety and security of the public is, of course, paramount. It is and always will be our number one priority. The ongoing fight to counter and contain terrorism in all its guises is an essential part of that mission, as is standing up for the values that we cherish. When our collective security and our values are threatened by groups such as the Terrorism Collective, we will not hesitate to act. We will do whatever it takes to protect our communities, and I therefore urge members to support this prescription, and I commend the order to the House.
The question is that this motion be agreed to.
My Lords, I want to first respond to the Minister's statement by thanking our intelligence, security and police services, as well as the Home Office staff for their work in protecting us all. The government's first duty has always been to protect national security and protect the public. The people undertake the challenging work of making sure we are always one step ahead of those who wish to cause us harm will always find support from these benches. We strongly support the introduction of this order. Terrorism, named for its use of online messaging platform Telegram, is an online collection of violent neo-fascists who distribute and promote material that incites right-wing extreme terrorist activity both in the UK and across the world. The propaganda distributed by this network targets violence of ethnic minorities, as the Noble Lord Sharp said, religious groups, women, the LGBT community, and Telegram groups promote a dangerous and violent, misogynistic, homophobic and anti-Semitic ideology. They glorify terrorist attacks like those committed by Anders Breivik and incite both violent terrorist attacks and are also used to distribute bomb-making guides and other dangerous instructional material designed to aid would-be attackers. The dangerous consequence of their actions were demonstrated only recently, as the Noble Lord Sharp said, in the people who were murdered in the LGBT nightclub in Bratislava by a terrorist who thanked Terrorism in his manifesto. The government's welcome update of the definition of extremism and this prescription order will provide a much needed tool to prevent such attacks from being repeated here in the UK. In the light of the evidence connecting right-wing ideologies and violent terrorist attacks to misogynistic views, can the Minister expand on what more the government can do to counter this? Are there plans to update the Prevent programme to include incel ideology and violent misogyny as extremism? How is the Home Office working to prevent young men from being exposed to extreme misogynistic ideologies at a young age? what work is being done with the other government departments to combat this threat? More broadly, what is the government doing to assess and confront online hate and extremism that form the basis of many terrorism threats? I would also welcome the Minister speaking more about the government's counter-extremism strategy, beyond the list of organisations defined as terrorists that the government has said it will release. Will a full, updated counter-extremism strategy also be published? The previous strategy was published in 2015. The way Telegram uses online networks and platforms and intersects with other violent neo-Nazi organisations across the world demonstrates the growing complexity of the threats we face. As the terrorist threat evolves and becomes harder to predict and prevent, our understanding of the causes, the nature and the consequence of those threats we face must also evolve. The government's hate crime strategy has also not been updated since 2015. Telegram's violent, bigoted ideology sits within the context of rising levels of hate crime across the UK. Hate crimes against transgender people hit record highs in England and Wales last year. Anti-Semitic hate crimes, the Community Safety Trust recorded a 147% increase in anti-Semitic incidents since October the 7th, compared with 2022. It is important to have prescription orders in our arsenal of weapons against hate, extremism and terrorism. But they cannot be the only weapon, and can the Minister outline whether the government plans to publish a new hate crime strategy? This order is very welcome. Prescription is the right thing, is the right response to a dangerous and complex network that threatens our way of life, our public safety and our national security. This House and the country is united in protecting us all, and we fully support the order. I have one final question that no one can answer. This clearly is a vile, disgusting group, but why have we waited so long? Why haven't we been able to come to this order maybe much earlier? Because some of the things they've been involved in, clearly over quite a long period of time, are things we all abhor. But with that, I support the order.
Sorry? Well, look, I thank the Noble Lord very much indeed for his support and the support of his party for this. He has, we have covered some ground here, and I'll do my very best to answer the questions. Why have we decided to prescribe the Telegram Collective now? In order, I think I explained much of this in my opening remarks, but to prescribe an organisation, the Home Secretary must believe that it is concerned in terrorism, and it is right that any decision to prescribe must be proportionate and necessary. As the House has heard, Telegram involves itself in preparing for terrorism through instructional material. They also promote and encourage terrorism through their publications, which contain violent narratives. As prescription is such a powerful counter-terrorism tool, and cases are scrutinised carefully to ensure that the decisions we take are lawful, consistent and proportionate. Because prescription sends such a strong message of the UK's commitment to tackling terrorism globally and calling out this activity wherever it is committed. But of course, the evidence has to be very, very carefully scrutinised, and I think that's, in essence, the reason why it has taken a while to get to this point. The Noble Lord has also asked me about the counter-extremism strategy and what's happening with that, what has replaced the old one. My Lords, the government remains very much focused on disrupting the activities and the influence of extremists, supporting those who stand up to extremism and stopping people from being drawn into terrorism. We keep our response to extremism under constant review for the reasons that the Noble Lord laid out, in particular things such as the CREST research that he referred to. We have to make sure that it's best placed to tackle evolving threats. So the government's current focus is to use existing mechanisms to analyse, prevent and disrupt the spread of high-harm extremist ideologies that can lead to community division and to radicalisation into terrorism, particularly those that radicalise others but deliberately operate below counter-terrorism thresholds. Where there is evidence of purposeful actions that are potentially radicalising others into terrorism or violence, proportionate disruptive action will be considered. My Lords, in terms of the incel misogyny comments that were made by the Noble Lord, again, we will not tolerate the spread of these harmful ideologies that can lead to these sorts of activities. There are a wide range of offences and powers that can be used to counter the threat from these areas, and we're working to maximise their use. But of course we know, and this I think the Noble Lord referred to, that the extremism landscape is constantly evolving, and therefore we have to continually seek to build and refresh our knowledge of the threat it poses. From the 1st of April 2023, the government instructed all police forces in England and Wales to identify any violence against the person, including stalking and harassment, or sexual offences where the crime is deemed to be motivated by hostility towards the victim's sex. The implementation of sex-based hostility recording illustrates the government's commitment to ensuring we have a better understanding of these abhorrent crimes, and that will obviously assist us in future policy development. My Lords, I'll conclude by again offering my thanks for the House's consideration of and support for this very important measure. It is, as I've outlined, proportionate and necessary in our ongoing effort to tackle terrorism, to protect the public and to defend our values. There is no place whatsoever for the vile ideology espoused by the Terrorism collective, and we will not stand for it. And we will never relent in showing up terrorism for what it is, a poisonous, corrosive force that will always fail. And with that, my Lords, I commend the order to the House.
I'd like to thank the Noble Lord the Minister, if I may, for introducing the statutory order. I support the addition of the Terrorism collective to follow the recent addition of his Art Tahrir to the prescribed organisation list under this order. This online terror collective, as has been said, supported acts of terrorism in Norway, in Slovakia, and incitement in the Baltimore case of attacks on power substations. And in common with its immediate predecessor on the list, it seeks to incite violence against Jewish people in the State of Israel, including that of Hamas and its attack on the 7th of October, which it supported. Such a prescription, therefore, has my support, but it prompts a wider question about the Terrorism Act 2000, under which the prescriptions are made. That Act defines terrorism in Section 1, which includes the use or threat of action where the use or threat is designed to influence the government or an intergovernmental organisation, or to intimidate the public or a section of the public, and the use or threat is made for the purposes of advancing a political, religious, or ideological cause. And in 2D, it refers to creating a serious risk to the health or safety of the public or a section of the public, and so on. And therefore, my question to my noble friend, the Minister, is, while prescription outlaws an organisation, it does not address the blatant advocacy on our streets during the pro-Palestine marches of actions of intimidation against the Jewish community in Israel or at home. These, in the words of the 2000 Act, and I quote, create a serious risk to the safety of the public or a section of it, and are designed to influence the government or to intimidate. May I urge my noble friend, in the same spirit of this addition to the prescribed list, to reconsider the arrangements for these marches in this context. Surely it is time for Her Majesty's Government to go beyond the standard reply that policing of marches is an operational matter for the police. Does the intimidation and threat to a section of our people, the Jewish minority here and overseas, not require a more direct address by the law, given that policing to date has proved inadequate, and in addition to this prescription, which I welcome?
Well, my Lords, I appreciate the sentiments behind my noble friend's questions. I'm not sure it's entirely appropriate for this format, but I will just rehash the powers that are conferred on the government under the 1986 Public Order Act. The Home Secretary does not have the direct power to prohibit a public procession. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police has the power to prohibit public processions under Section 13 of the Act, but before this power can be used, they must reasonably believe that the power to impose conditions under Section 12 of the Public Order Act of 1986 would not be sufficient to prevent serious public disorder and must obtain the consent of the Secretary of State. I'm afraid those are questions that would be better addressed to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. As many as have that opinion shall say content. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg to move the House do now adjourn.
That the House do now adjourn.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.